thank you for joining us. We're really pleased to put forward this community event today, talking about red teaming and pen testing and how the two disciplines complement each other, and also the rise of intelligence-led security. We see community events as something really important at CREST. We want to build that bridge. We obviously want to get into the weeds of technical conversations, and we want to foster that, but we really want to orientate around a process and around a topic, and just share some of the good practice that we're working through here. There'll be some updates around exams, etc., and some of the stuff that the focus groups are working on. The structure of this is that the focus groups themselves tend to focus on specific disciplines, either red teaming or pen testing, and so we'll be able to share some updates there. Really happy to have two speakers that are going to cover off talking about the aspects of pen testing and intelligence-led security testing, or as we like to consider it, red teaming in itself. And so I'd really like to thank you for your attendance, and I hope that you enjoy the talks that we've got forwards today. A little bit later, as I said, we'll present you with some updates as to what we've been working on internally. But for now, I'd like to introduce Tony. If we could go on to the next slide as well, please, for the agenda. Thank you very much. If I can bring in Tony now, please, he's going to share some information about leveraging passive threat modeling. So thank you very much, Tony.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Hey, CREST members, and also those intrigued by doing some level of intelligence-led pen testing. My name is Tony UV. Formerly, I'm Tony UcedaVélez, but I go by Tony UV, CEO, founder of VerSprite. I want to talk a lot about how to operationalize threat intel into various types of adversarial engagements. So if we can go just to the next slide, we're just going to dive in. All right. So as mentioned, this part of the talk is really about how to operationalize threat intelligence into some of the adversarial engagements. A little bit about myself. I am the author of the Risk-Centric Threat Modeling book, co-author with Marco Morana. We're both OWASP fellows. I lead the Atlanta chapter in Atlanta, Georgia, and Marco Morana has been affiliated and a leader himself with OWASP for years. He was a senior leader in the banking community out of London, then moved back to the States. But we were both very big risk nerds, and risk requires data, and part of that data is intel. We'll get into that in a second. A lot of the viewpoints are really going to hinge on from decades worth of experience, especially doing adversarial engagements, both on the emulated threat actor side, but also on the stakeholder side, right? When you have something to protect and you want someone or a group of people to be able to do some level of adversarial engagements. So been a long time CREST supporter, and CREST, I partake with the pen testing focus group with Boglarka. So definitely a great organization. If you want more information, please do check out crestapproved.org. But diving into the topic for today, let's go to the next slide, and let's begin by looking at the agenda really quick. Really, we're going to be exploring the relevance of intelligence in different types of adversarial or types of models. So pen testing, red teaming, and purple teaming, just to start with. We can go to the next slide. We'll go ahead and talk about kind of level setting. What is an adversarial engagement model, right? And really the whole intent here as we go to the overview of this is really to try to understand that adversarial exercises are meant to create a simulation on what a threat actor would do against a product, network, application, or an entire entity. So the idea is really, we're trying to evolve away from like checkbox type of security testing, right? Which oftentimes, again, being a leader in OWASP myself for close to 20 years, there's oftentimes the temptation to do some level of checkbox that maybe addresses a checklist or maybe a regulatory driver. But we want to be able to try to understand when it comes to adversarial engagements, there is a structured approach, which could be a checkbox, type of approach, or those that are really trying to emulate or simulate a real world attack. Overall, the purpose of any adversarial exercise is really to do that, is to simulate what would an attacker do? What would a real attacker do? What would be their motives, intentions, tools, tactics, procedures. What are some of the tools that they would be using? I know that we'll get into that a little bit in the separate presentation. And then we want to be able to evolve, right? I mean, the threat landscape is evolving. The technology set is evolving as many organizations globally are beginning to adopt now, AI components into their ecosystem of applications. The threat landscape is changing. Geopolitical factors are changing motives. So there's a lot of things that are changing. We have to be able to try to emulate that as part of a simulation, and that's what adversarial engagements are for. So today we'll really talk about some common models, which is pen testing, red teaming, and purple teaming. We'll differentiate the three for those that maybe aren't as well versed in those key differentiators, and talk about how information is going to be fueling for a better version of each one. So let's go to the next slide really quick as we dive into the first realm of pen testing. All right, so traditional pen test. Let's talk about the obvious, right? You can do pen testing, short for penetration testing, is really meant to look at the feasibility of penetrating into and then insert target object. It could be a network, it could be a domain, it could be an application, a mobile application. You want to be able to see the exploitability. Good pen tests are really going through, any tried and true methodology of doing some level of discovery, open source intelligence gathering, fingerprinting, going into vulnerability analysis and detection, and then going into the exploitation phase. Anybody that's done pen testing for a very long time knows that the exploitation phase is actually the smaller phase. Better intel, better fingerprinting, better vulnerability research will allow you to actually, have kind of a better sniper shot, if you will, on your exploitation phase. But traditionally, a lot of times, the buyer side is really intended to see what is actually possible from an adversarial standpoint to a specific target. Again, application, network, etc. And so, the goals or the focus is very micro, right? You have, product-based pen testing, an API endpoint. Maybe you want to pen test. Maybe even a mainframe where you have a RACF or top secret security catalog to see if something could be abused in terms of privileges and things like that. Pen testing typically in the past has been very checklist, however. We'll get into the differences on intelligence-led pen testing, and we'll see what is the difference on that, but we'll get into that in a second. Let's go into red teaming now. So with red teaming, it's definitely a bigger scope, right? You're talking, red teaming is a term that typically lends from military roots, where it's trying to use any means necessary in order to infiltrate a larger attack surface. Whereas pen testing would be normally like an app, an API endpoint, maybe a subnet, a set of IPs. Red teaming is going to encompass maybe all of those, right? There's objectives to red teaming. Some of it might be to be able to get into a broader environment and maybe plan something. But again, like we talked about in pen testing, some of the traditional red teaming might simply be either a checkbox related to the fact that we did a red team, or the fact that it's the goals and objectives are really set or determined by the red teamer, right? And that can be a dangerous proposition because you have some red teamers that might be like cowboys or cowgirls that are going in as mavericks to be able to say, we're just gonna, light the place on fire, figuratively speaking. Others are going to get a little bit more of a guidance, right? There's different facets of doing any type of adversarial engagement, where there's some level of intel is provided by an organization. But the main difference here is that you have a broader scope, right? Traditionally, you have the inclusion of maybe some physical controls, right? You're looking at, trying to get around some of the physical securities like turnstiles, CCTV cameras, proxy card badge readers, etc. And then there's the human element, of course. There is, individual security guards, people that are kind of gating whatever you're trying to get into as part of a red team. So definitely it really traverses logical, physical domains in terms of what's protecting an enterprise. And the whole entire goal here is to really try to see what is possible. Again, there is a huge difference between intelligence-led red teaming and just a standard red teaming that someone that says, oh, I need a red team because everyone else is doing a red team, and I want to check that box. And so you leave the goals, objectives, usually to the red teamer, which is, in my opinion, not the best scenario for a lot of reasons we'll get into. But let's move into purple team. So purple team teaming is one of my favorites because it's very collaborative. As many of you know out there in cybersecurity, or InfoSec as it used to be termed, our relationships with our internal customers can be pretty adversarial. Speaking about adversity, they don't necessarily, we're always playing this sort of adversarial role where it's like, hey, your baby's ugly, your network has these flaws, your application is vulnerable, this is misconfigured. Purple teaming changes the narrative a little bit, and it basically makes it more collaborative. The whole intention here is to learn, both on the defensive side as the offensive side. And we're going to get into how data and intelligence can actually make for better defensive planning in the blue team side of the purple team, offensive planning with the red teaming exercises that are put down, but as well as the purple team, which is the team that's really kind of officiating and moderating what's happening on both the offensive and the defensive side. The idea here is to really workshop the overall adversarial engagement and to trigger some level of lessons learned, where some of those lessons learned show the smoking gun of an attack pattern that went through and bypassed edge network controls, or on node defenses like an EDR system, so EDR evasion and things like that. So to understand why, what alerted, what is the level of data telemetry that we don't have through the adversarial simulation. So very powerful exercise. I personally, it's one of my favorites because it's a lot more collaborative. But now let's move into this notion of intelligence, right? So let's go into this next slide. Well, before we do that, actually, let's do a quick summary. This is a great table here that kind of shows a lot of some of the key differences. With the one asterisk should be really on duration on purple teaming. Sometimes those can take a longer period of time. It just depends on scope. Scope defines everything, but overall, you kind of, if you're out there listening to this and you're trying to evaluate like what to pick, right? Let's say you've never done an adversarial engagement ever. If the goal is on product resiliency, product security validation, and it's very focused, pen testing. If the goal is to try to understand the readiness of an organization in terms of adversarial attack techniques, red teaming, right? Have a red team come up with some adversarial situations against the organization. It will basically put your logical network, cloud, you name it, types of layer defenses on the table to see if those can be subjugated. And then if you're really looking for an engagement where you want it to be collaborative, you want to be able to, come up with a plan that is going to determine what the adversarial engagement should be and how it should be conducted, and you want some lessons learned coming out of it, I would highly suggest the purple team. But now we're going to switch the table and turn the page into more intelligence-led of all the above, right? So we talked about the adversarial engagement models that are out there, and there's different variants of all of what I mentioned, by the way. This is not meant to be the comprehensive list of all adversarial types of simulations, but let's get into the Intel-based side of things. So let's move to the next slide, please. So first off, there's a saying, at least from the circles that I've been encountering with in the military, that says no operations without intel, or intel-based operations, right? You imagine like a aircraft carrier out in the ocean in the Pacific, and moving from point A, one coordinate set of coordinates to another set of coordinates based upon a hunch, right? The amount of just financial cost alone in logistics is enormous, as you can imagine. So Intel has to fuel what the military does, right? In both defenses, in terms of research, in terms of offensive strategies and things like that. Otherwise, there can be a lot of efforts that are done in vain or that are not going to be supportive of an objective. Similarly, in the realm of cybersecurity, there really isn't in nowadays, an opportunity where Intel-based pen testing cannot be done. But leveraging and understanding the military roots is that you have intelligence that is telling you a bit about, what is your attack surface? What are some of the, vulnerabilities or holes, if you will, in your defenses? What about adversarial groups? What are their motives? What are their means and capabilities? What are prior instances or incidents, if you will, that have taken place, especially by a threat actor, in terms of denoting that they like a certain type of approach, or let's call it tactic, in trying to realize a certain type of attack. So understanding your adversary, and part of it is associated with the term threat attribution, where you're understanding threat actor, threat motives, threat capabilities, and things like that. This level of threat attribution helps you to be able to have a better understanding of that threat actor, so you can profile them. You can take that understanding of what that threat actor is able to do from an attack standpoint, and then you can emulate that in a simulation. So next slide, please. Now, if we talk about, the differences, it's really simple with Intel fed versus non-Intel fed or traditional approaches. Oftentimes, many out there will listen to this and recognize that people need a pen test for a client reason, or let's say for PCI DSS, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in producing or doing that actual adversarial exercise of a pen test, for example, oftentimes you're skipping over the fact that you're needing to feed in threat intel to emulate, right? It's more of a security approach versus a compliance-based approach, where the compliance initiative might say, hey, is your card data environment secure? Well, it is, because I did a pen test and I ran it against the top 20 of XYZ list and nothing came up. So here you go. And we all know that in the industry, this, fortunately or unfortunately, passes a lot of the grades out there. Intel-led based approach, however, says, I'm concerned about like my card data environment, but for different Intel-based reasons, because maybe there is, a financial group like Fin13 that is after card data, right? Or there's a group that is focusing on malware or ransomware distribution. So the Intel drives the operations for the pen test. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we talk about like threat models, now I'm going to introduce this topic of threat models. So threat modeling, oftentimes when I talk about threat modeling, people really kind of like start to think I'm talking about threat intel. Threat intel can substantiate a threat assertion in a threat model. So there is kind of like this like Russian doll like hierarchy that exists, right? The purpose of a model of threats is that you say these are the types of threats that could actually happen against my application, pen test, organization, red team, or focus scope area for a purple team. And you're using the threat model to basically serve as a blueprint for both defense and offense. The intelligence that you have will substantiate, like someone may ask, why do you think that we need to prepare for someone trying to persist in our environment? And the threat sources would say, well, similar companies in warehousing and logistics and manufacturing have actually been victimized over the past 24 months with these different scenarios, right? It's Intel that's providing the rationale for the offensive or defensive model. PASA is an acronym for the Process for Attack Simulation and Threat Analysis, and specific and topical to this conversation is stages 4 and 6. Stages 4 is let's do threat analysis on our particular application or environment that we want to do an adversarial engagement with. And stage 6 is let's try it out. Let's see what happens, right? PASTA stands for Process for Attack Simulation and Threat Analysis, and it's a risk-centric model, meaning that you want to substantiate why something is risky. But let's go to the next slide really quick as we build off of this and really talk about, we'll go over these next 2 slides, which is like, what's the problem of doing it the old way? Well, the problem of doing it the old way is that you're really missing a lot of value in roping in intelligence. If you're part of a mid-size or even a large organization, definitely a large organization, you know that you might be subscribing to threat intel sources from Mandiant, Recorded Future, now MasterCard, and 5 other different places, right? The question I love to ask is, how are you operationalizing that threat intelligence into adversarial exercises that you're doing or paying someone else to do? The common answer is that I'm not. And so there's simply, from a financial lack of ROI, you're not able to really, you're losing a lot of that context. Now let's go to the solution slide on the next slide. The idea is taking some of this intel that can come from various different sources. Some of them might be part of like industry advisory groups, but some of the one of the key things there, you see there, the bullet point, align with business risk. Part of risk formula is to understand likelihood. If there is threat intelligence that shows that a particular component within your dependency tree of your application is being like attacked regularly by 3 different campaigns, it would behoove you to leave that out as a level of adversarial exercise that you do to see if it matches what's being done in the wild for the past 24 months, right? So what you have, from a multiple different standpoints, is you have higher fidelity findings. Your customers that receive these sort of products truly benefit and understand the big picture. It's like, oh, I see, you're giving me intel that matches what's actually happening, and you tried it and it worked or it didn't work or it partially worked, right? So it really improves stakeholder engagement. Next slide, please. Now, if you're, new to threat modeling, the idea is, a lot of people, when they say, oh, should I do this in addition to, the recommendation is to first build a threat model. The threat model is actually going to encompass a lot of your adversarial exercises, whether it be purple team, red teaming, or pen testing, but specific to a risk-centric approach. And there's a lot of approaches out there, and this is not an advocacy to any model. This is just one of several that are out there in the industry. But PTaaS is a risk-centric approach, and stage 2 and stage 4 specifically says, what am I running in my attack surface, right? And that's data. You can quasi say that's intel, right? But the real intel comes in stage 4. How do you operationalize the advisories that you get from a government or a industry-related advisory group, that their whole job is to be able to share intel sources on what types of threats, attack patterns, TTPs, prior incidents have actually happened for healthcare, for manufacturing, for financial, et cetera. Next slide, please. So just for those of you, I'm going to glaze over this, but if you're not familiar with pasta, it's 7 stages. And again, you can make your own pasta, pun intended. But the idea is that you have 3 functional areas. What do I care about? What do I run? What are the flows? And then the other 3 areas are more adversarial. What are the threats? What are the vulnerabilities that would substantiate these threats? And would attacks work? And then it ends with like residual risk analysis. What is actually possible net of all this, right? And if you're interested in more in this, I'd actually go check out GitLab. You Google GitLab pasta threat model. They wrote a great blog on how they adopted it and used pasta for doing their own threat modeling. But again, staying topical to the conversation, intelligence feeds stage 4. And that's really the reason I brought this slide up. But let's go to the next one, because intelligence also provides a great blueprint. One of my things, especially going back to pen testing, right? If you're going to pen test something here, you're going to red team something. Let's say that you want to red team extortion. Extortion is a threat. Oftentimes when you see threat model conversations, security people have a tendency to call an attack a threat. And in the English dictionary and in multiple other languages, there's a clear differentiation between what is a threat and what is an attack. The military also follows the same sort of definition. We in security, we might say the threat is sandbox escaping or SQL injection, and that's an attack. So is phishing. So what you want to do is say, what is the threat to my part of my organization that I want to do red team or pen test? And then how do I map that out to targets and to associations of vulnerabilities? And do I have threat intel that would actually substantiate one of those arrows? So if I go to vuln to attack, then it's it's important that those arrows that are in the branches of the attack tree can be substantiated by the intel that you gather or you have your operations team gather. Okay, so now I'm going to take this Aston Martin into sixth gear because I want to make sure that I don't go over time. Let's go into the next couple of slides. What we're going to be talking about now is simply some examples on emulating criminal intent with different types of adversarial integrations, beginning with pen testing. So an example of different intel. So let's say that, so with APT 41, there's techniques that were authentication bypass techniques. Just sticking on that bullet point alone, if APT 41 is something which, by the way, typically affected, healthcare, it affected a lot of, especially medical research institutions. APT 41 is associated with like Wicked Panda and Barium and things like that. If you're a healthcare entity or healthcare covered organization, then you want to be able to see, are we susceptible to this? That's a reasonable business question to ask. And so you can take some of the techniques used and you can try to emulate that through an adversarial exercise. It can be through a pen test of an EHR system, a patient portal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or as part of a red team where you say we want to basically look at where authentication is used for different places of where it has medical information being protected and try to see if we can go around that. Intel sources are a dime a dozen, and you can spend literally weeks going through a lot of intel sources. There's a lot of bad threat intel, and many that are out there are probably shaking their heads as I say that. So it's important that you work with your internal teams or outside partners to be able to curate what are the best sources for threat intel. There's also frameworks like MITRE ATT&CK, which by the way is a post-exploitation framework. So after you've exploited something, what do you do? Things like lateral movement. These are important things. It's not necessarily threat intel. This goes back to going back to checklist box approach. A lot of individuals and entities might be saying, well, I'm going to use MITRE ATT&CK as that's my end all be all. And if I want to run through and see if any of these things are possible, that's great. Meanwhile, a similar competitor of yours within the same industry, let's take transportation, might actually be using intel of what's been happening to other transportation companies over the past 6-12 months, and then using that to say, what are the TTPs associated with these incidents, right? One's a framework, different. There's nothing wrong with using a framework, but recognize that it is more of a checkbox approach, so it's different. Moving on to red teaming and threat-inspired led red teaming on the next slide. Really quickly, similar things, so you want to be able to, one of the things that, a lot of red teamings, like as I mentioned before, the companies might leverage the red team to on their own determine what you want to, attack. Make the red team to emulate something that's affected, your particular industry. So for example, if we look at the banking and financial services, they were affected by threat actor Fin13. Right, and typically, that the TTPs associated with that have been speared phishing, which had basically like malware-laced financial spreadsheets. That's the intel, right? Operationalize that into a red team where you can basically see, hey, does this type of attack pattern work? If we emulate that, do a speared phishing campaign, maybe leverage some deep fake capabilities, maybe leverage some, a compromise like a vendor or associated vendor domain, or maybe subdomain, do like some sort of type squatting, and then to see if the viability of that actually would emulate the TTPs found from the threat intel. This is an example, just one of many that can be used for using threat intel as a way to better bolster your red teaming exercises. And then it has some other APT emulation examples there, APT 29 with Cozy Bear. But a lot of these threat actors and the campaigns that they launch have associated TTPs that have been captured by various different sources that you may want to consider when you're doing red teaming. Let's go into purple team really quick. So one of the favorite things I love to do is when you do a collaborative exercise like purple team, you build a threat model for let's say you're doing one for the organization or a line of business. Let's say you work for a very large multinational bank, and one of the lines of business is consumer credit lending. And so consumer credit lending, that's the focus of the purple team. And you build a threat model that governs what are the threats that are substantiated by threat intel, right? So you rope in that threat intel from stage 4 into the PASTA threat model, and that creates an offensive plan of action for the red team. Similarly, they can look at the same threat model on the blue team side and say, okay, where do we feel that we have our defenses properly calibrated, properly configured? Do we feel that we have great data telemetry coming into our SIM? Do we have any sort of like automation and playbooks with a SOAR, right? The intel of the threat model, the intel-based threat model is going to allow the red team to go and attack and the blue to defend. And there's going to be some misses on the blue side. There's going to be some misses on the red side. The purple team will revisit and say, here's our threat model. We try these different attack patterns that supported these threat objectives, and these worked. These were defended upon. And so the net result is a great exercise where there's some lessons learned, again, based upon intelligence that you tried to simulate in the purple team engagement. It really resonates really well, especially for executives, or let's say the executive for that consumer lending line of department, right, at the financial institution. We're finally speaking in a plane, right, in a communication plane that they get. So in closing, I think we have 1 or 2 more slides left. Let's just kind of go to the final 2 points just to wrap up here on the next slide. So final thoughts. So, recommendation, is that if you're interested, there's a lot of recommendations that have come from what I've just mentioned over the past couple of minutes. Definitely evolving from kind of checkbox-based adversarial engagements, whether it be pen testing, red teaming, or purple teaming. Next level up is definitely, leverage some of the intel that you might be harvesting, as an organization. Work with your security operations groups. Next level up is to maybe build a threat model against your target, whether it be the application, and then let that threat model dictate how you're going to pen test, right? Stage 6 of PASTA, for example, is attack simulation, but the attack is building off of the weaknesses identified, building off of the threat intelligence that has been operationalized that says these are the types of threats that are happening to other similar products out there in the field. On the overall intelligence-based anything provides for a greater executive support. So if you're kind of on the fence, understand that, in security, the job is never easy in communicating vertically up to C-levels and executives. So once you have a rationale, executives are at their level of business, right? Because they're smart and they've been around and they have massive amounts of context. So you bringing in the context of intel and fueling some of the things that you're asking for financing on, whether it be a pen test or a red team or a purple team, is going to really, bolster your overall reputation as a professional within the organization. It's going to create a culture of education versus one of like, hey, you're in violation of, this authentication bypass, which is in the OWASP top 10. Like, at multiple different levels. And as an OWASP fellow and, security leader for decades, no one cares. So if you really take the intelligence to build better context, overall your experience and the overall deliverable and the exercise itself is going to be world's difference. If you have questions, I will conclude with the last slide. And if you want to be able to get a free ebook on the PASTA methodology, just use that QR code and it'll allow you to download the free ebook. And again, recommendation is build your own threat model, make it contextual to you, and then use that as a blueprint for your adversarial intel-based adversarial engagements. So thanks to everybody. And I think Boglarka, you're coming up next.
Thank you, Tony. I'll just jump in here for a second. Thank you very much for that presentation. Really thought-provoking. Lots of interesting points to take away there about the whys and what's of what you're doing, and really understanding how you approach things and the differences between the various disciplines. So that was really great. We've got a live Q&A section, so if there are any questions you want to direct to Tony, myself, Boglarka, or later on to Philip, please feel free to put those in the chat, and then we'll try and pick up some of those at the end of the session, assuming that what time we've got left. But just another thank you there to Tony for a really engaging presentation. We really appreciate your insights.
Not a problem.
So now I'm going to hand over to Boglarka, who is the chair of the pen testing group, and she's going to provide us with some insights into what the focus group have been up to and then the direction of travel. So I'll hand over to Boglarka. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. Virtual high five to you and also to Tony. It's amazing to see so many people on the webinar today. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope you have enjoyed the content so far, and also that you're excited for what is about to come. We have another speaker a little bit later today, but before Philip takes the stage and talks about the different geographies of red teaming, I have a couple of updates for you from our pentest focus group and community. Just really briefly on who I am. I'm Boglarka Ronto, or Bobby for friends and colleagues. Very nice to virtually meet all of you. And this picture is from my natural habitat, sipping one of my many, many cups of coffee a day. As most of the people that are presenting today, I have a day job which is with the consultancy firm called Resillion, and I work with both public and private sector organizations to help them with their cybersecurity requirements. And in my capacity with CREST, I chair the focus group for pen testing, and I'm involved with some of the other initiatives as well, which you can see on the screen. Outside of these day jobs or the day job, I've been contributing to some of the other standards organizations and industry bodies, and occasionally speaking. So you might have seen me speak, or you might have seen me at some of the events. And if you're brave enough, you can scan the QR code and connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love it if you reached out, and I would be happy to have a chat about some of the good stuff that is going on at CREST. So please do reach out if you want to have a chat. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the main updates that I have for you all today is about exams in the pen test discipline, in the pen test field. All of these exams are available online, are available through Pearson VUE, and they have been in place for some time. Just a quick refresher, we have multiple tiers of exams, which you can see in the bottom right corner. We have CPSA, which is our entry-level pen test exam, followed by CRT, which is intended for individuals with a couple of years of experience doing vulnerability testing, penetration testing. There's a slightly more comprehensive coverage that needs to be demonstrated on the exam, also from a practical point of view. And then in the bottom row, we have the specialist senior exams, which we call CCT, which we have broken down into application and infrastructure specialisms. So we've been getting, over the years that these exams have been in place, we've been getting a good amount of feedback on the forms that are attached to the exam and just on the side as well. And we've been constantly making updates to these exams. We've introduced something called a CREST drive, which allows you to carry some of your notes into the exam and use them as you're progressing through the exams. The exams have been created in a modular way so that there's no reliance between the sections, so you don't get stuck so much during the exams. And one of the main areas that we've been consistently getting feedback on is in relation to the syllabus, the actual topics that are involved in the exam itself. So whilst previously we've been doing periodic updates every couple of years to the syllabus, we've started applying a much more agile approach to reviewing the syllabi. And there's two things that I wanted to kind of point out in relation to this. Firstly, we would welcome more feedback, specifically in relation to where the exam should evolve from the community, from practitioners, from yourselves who do testing every day, or you're getting engagement from your customers on a regular basis, but also we would like to get feedback on the exam experience that you're going through as you sit through these exams, so that we can make them better. There are working groups which were set up to get involved. We have a sequence that we're going through, and if you'd like to participate in actively forging the way that these exams look like going forward and what the syllabus looks like, please reach out. You can also share your feedback through the email address and the anonymous form that you can see on the screen, in case you prefer to remain anonymous. So yeah, share any detail, good and bad, or any experiences that you'd like. And if you want to be part of the journey, then please let us know. If you could go to the next slide for me, please. All right. This is just to kind of bring everybody up to speed on some of the other things that are happening within the pentest community and the focus group. We have several initiatives that we're working on in parallel, but I've put on the screen some of the upcoming activities that I'd love for many of you to join in. So obviously I've mentioned on the previous slide about the exam syllabus review, which is going to be an ongoing initiative. So please, anytime, if you don't have time today or this month to contribute, even if you'd like to do some of this or be part of some of this work in a few months' time, it would be amazing if you'd join. But outside of that, we're looking to get more engagement with academia, to be able to influence some of the direction that academia is heading in, some of the topics that may be discussed at universities, or if there's an opportunity to accept guest lecturers, or in any way that as industry we can provide input into academia and vice versa. And one of the other initiatives that is being set up as we speak is a new standard that will be following on, which I'm sure Philip will mention later today, the CBEST framework, which we're looking to apply to OT and industrial control systems. Very exciting topic, a little bit of a fusion between penetration testing and red teaming fields, but this is going to be ramping up in the near future. If you're interested or excited by this, please let us know. And then finally, we have opened up call for papers for our upcoming CRESTCon in the autumn. And we would love you to consider participating and responding to our CFP call. Please send your topic to marketing@crestapproved.org if you'd like to participate. Again, please drop your questions into the Q&A box if you'd like to put them forward, and we'll be happy to answer them for you. So now I will hand over to lovely Matt Lorentzen, who chairs the ILPT focus group. Matt, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Bobby. Can I have the next slide, please? So, thank you everybody for attending this. I've obviously spoken to you before, but I haven't formally introduced myself yet. So my name's Matt Lorentzen. I've been working in a cyber-focused role for about 15 years now. So I've very much gone through the CREST track of qualifications. Before then, I was a sysadmin for a long time, about 10 years, through my own consultancy and working in various educational establishments. So very much infrastructure focused tester. I have been the chair of the ILT since August 2023. So the idea of the focus groups is to bring in people from different regions who will talk about the discipline, and there is some focus on the exams themselves and the syllabus and what we want to see in there, but also the wider discipline, what we're seeing in terms of emergence and trends, tradecraft. So that's very much the focus of the group, as to how we can bring in some of the new things that people are having to focus on and how we can assess people in that. So very much enjoy my responsibilities, very busy role, but certainly very rewarding. As I said, I've got some of the CREST qualifications, or I've held them for many years now. I'm also a CREST fellow, so if you pass the exams a number of times, then you become eligible for a fellowship, which was a great honour to receive. So I currently hold the CREST infrastructure testing qualification and the CCSAT, which has now been renamed to the RTS qualifications. These are specifically orientated around red teaming, the RTS exams, and we'll cover off some of that in due course. I became a CREST assessor last year, so that's really my role in the focus group, was to try and drive initiatives forwards, and it seemed like a natural progression to act as a bit of a bridge from the focus group into the actual assessor community, and look to implement some of the exam changes and try and build on some of the things that I'll discuss that we've launched in terms of new exam structures. As with all things CREST, you tend to get involved in other places. You know, once you demonstrate some enthusiasm, then there's plenty of places you can direct that enthusiasm. So I'm involved in the International Council, and now also involved in the Technical Committee. And really those are roles that are trying to shape the direction of CREST. And look at what meets the needs of an individual that's looking to go through the CREST certification structure, but also acknowledgement of organisations and membership companies and what they actually need from CREST and how we can build that community feel. So really important that people are here today. I've recently gone through the chartership process. So this is an initiative within the UK, which is where I'm based, where they're attaching professional titles to things now. So based on experience, etc., being able to demonstrate more aligned to different professions like medical professions, etc. Because the reality of it is, lots of people working in this field, we actually have quite a large responsibility when we're talking about the overall integrity and security of a system. So, you know, these types of professional titles really look at an individual above and beyond just technical capability, and they look at consultancy and time management and the ability to communicate efficiently. So this is the type of thing that's being adopted in other regions. It's certainly a focus for the world. We've seen these conversations being approached, but for me, I found it a really good experience. As I said, I've worked in a range of sectors through my testing career, and that broad experience of different frameworks and requirements and testing and objectives for different sectors is always quite interesting. Keeps you on your toes. I've spoken at various conferences, and I'm really passionate about just generally sharing knowledge and building relationships with like-minded people, and especially bringing people on into the industry. You know, we hear a lot about this squeeze in terms of capable people coming in. So I'm really passionate about looking to get involved in the education sector more broadly at university levels, and providing pathways for people into cybersecurity as a dedicated career, and all of the facets that we have here at CREST. You know, we don't just cover off pen testing, we have incident response and SOC management. There's a real range of things, threat intelligence. There's a huge range of disciplines within the overall cyberspace, and we try to cater to a lot of those. Next slide, please. So a bit of a reality check. The CSAT exam and the SAM exam, now the RTM and the RTS exams, they were certainly due a facelift. They were very important exams because these are kind of qualifications that were bolted into a lot of the regulatory framework. So there was an implied responsibility there in terms of ensuring that we had good availability of exams, but also that the exams were fit for purpose. We can all, anybody working in the red team space, surely knows that it's a very fast-moving discipline, and what was once useful is no longer viable, and that's because of detection models, etc. So we needed to have some sort of a balance where we could recognize the types of skills and things that we would want people to be able to operate within, based on, you know, broader experience of different networks and different environments and different security controls, but also being able to bring in some more of that real-world feel. And as I mentioned, a lot of this sort of stuff is built into regulatory frameworks that are heavily driven by threat intelligence. I myself have worked within CBEST framework, which is orientated by the Bank of England, overseen by the Bank of England. and the FCA, Financial Conduct Authority, etc. And these are really regulatory bodies that mandate that any financial entity should undergo some sort of a simulated attack or an emulated attack. And maybe we'll get into the conversations about what's simulation and what's emulation for later on. But mandate that these they have a threat intelligence piece in there that looks at these organizations and tries to understand what the real world risks are. And essentially it's a what if question, like what happens if this, how can we recover? What's the impact on business critical systems, etc. And I've also worked in the GBEST frameworks, or GCASE now, which is the government-led framework. So this is run by the Cabinet Office in the UK. And rather than looking at financial, these are looking at government departments, where obviously there's a slightly different imperative there into understanding what the risk is. But the goal is the same. A lot of these sorts of frameworks are really orientated around what is the impact should something actually be compromised. So as CREST have evolved into all of this, we've realized that the exams themselves needed to be made more accessible to people globally. Essentially, that's always been the goal of CREST. Historically, they were very restricted to the UK, and you had to be in the UK to be able to take them physically in a testing centre. And as I have done many times, you would go along with your build laptop and you would perform a test. And you would be put through some fairly vigorous technical challenges, and you would leave your disk behind, and then and hopefully you would receive a successful email at the end of it all. We've evolved this now, and we've partnered with Pearson VUE to be able to make these exams more accessible to everybody, essentially from a global place. And whilst in terms of, as I said before, things like GBEST and CBEST mandate the requirements for CCSAM, RTS, RTM, it's going to take a little bit of time for that to stick for me after many years, RTM, RTS people to actually be involved in the delivery of this. We have seen this emerging in different regions as adopting, really based on best practice. It's a testament to your experience when you hold one of these qualifications. And as I said before, from a non-biased view, and having gone through them prior to becoming an assessor, they are, technically taxing. They do require very clear thought about what you're up against, and be able to draw on that experience that you've had. So we are seeing the emergence. And so why these aren't necessarily required in other regions, they are becoming something that people look for. I've worked quite a lot in Asia in ICAST deliveries, etc., which is that type of a framework orientated towards CBEST. And whilst they aren't mandated, these types of qualifications, they do provide some level of assurance that the people delivering it have got relevant levels of experience and understanding as to the delicacies, if you will, of delivering this type of stuff. A lot of the time you're testing live, it's against critical systems. The impact is important. You need to understand the risk of data, particularly where the scenarios are calling for you to go after sensitive data, whether that's personal data that's being held within the organizations or financial data. So really some level of pragmatism and one eye on trying to meet the objective, whilst also performing these in the safest possible way they can be, whilst aligning them to real world threats is imperative. And a lot of the exams that we have now sort of underpin that. So really pleased with the abilities that we've got there. A lot of work has gone in behind the scenes to creating the new RTS and RTM exams, really reflecting the evolution of the discipline. Next slide, please. So I'm pleased to announce that after a fairly extensive level of development and testing last year, we launched our new RTS practicals in the UK in December, and now we've pushed that so that these exams are available worldwide from this year. And the new model is that you would go to a Pearson VUE testing centre and you're essentially placed in a simulated environment. And then from that, there's a set of objectives. So, as I said, what's really important about these exams is the understanding of how you follow TI, threat intelligence, and you try and emulate the types of attacks that organizations are seeing. And so largely a lot of this is driven from objectives that we try and achieve through kind of a realistic corporate environment with the types of security controls and things that you would have to consider in the real world. There's no more taking your own laptop. You're presented within an environment where you've got access to all the tools you would need to perform the exam itself on both multiple platforms. And you can switch between them, and it feels very natural to be able to attack this environment and work through a sequence of objectives along a longer kill chain. And as with all these things, the more points you get, the further in that you get into the exam, the more opportunities you have to hopefully gain that successful pass. So far, the feedback has been really positive from candidates. Certainly, it was a welcome uplift from the old exams, which were starting to look their age at that point. We definitely wanted to build in some more agility in that. The problem with trying to implement some of these things is that once you've created them, they're essentially already becoming obsolete in terms of the fast-paced red teaming environments that we all have to work in. So we really wanted some flexibility in how we could add in emerging trends or different things that we would want to see that just kind of create that real world feel. It was really important that we felt that candidates had the opportunity to feel like they were going through a realistic attack chain rather than something which was fairly contrived. So some significant development time has been put into this so that we can make the types of things that people have to achieve more modular. That gives us more agility. It means that if there's something emerging, we can add that in, really. So we're really proud of what we've achieved there. And as I said, the feedback for the exam so far has been really positive. Us as a wider group, so as I said, a large amount of the focus last year was really around how we could support the assessor community, how we could gain feedback as to what people really wanted from these exams, both at the individual level and at the company level, because, let's face it, we all work for organisations, and some of these organisations deliver this type of testing. So these qualifications are important. So we reflected on that. But we've also been tasked as a group to come up with other things which are really kind of best practice, or drawing on that type of experience that we've got within the group. So one example of that would be, it was highlighted that there isn't really that much out there in terms of guidance about best practice for red team tooling management. Now, I hope some of you would agree that it's potentially dangerous to pull stuff down from GitHub and just execute those in environments if you're not fully aware of what's going on with those tool sets, particularly if you're delivering this type of stuff in mission critical states where there could potentially be significant impact if you weren't aware. But what's the best practice of that? What does good look like? CI/DI pipelines, etc. Things that are picking up those tools, source code analysis and review, so that you can have some level of confidence that what's being used on engagements is actually safe to use. And that then ties into your own bespoke tooling and how that fits into a red teaming pipeline for that type of stuff. So that's one example within the group that we've been working on. We've built together, one of our members, Saeed, has put together a fairly lengthy set of overarching views for the pluses and the minuses of different approaches, and we're pulling those types of things together, and we'd really like to release that out to the community as a resource, basically, that people can absorb. And so that's one example of the types of things that we're working on, always looking at how we can evolve the actual discipline itself and the types of output we're making so that we can bridge back into the community. So that's everything from me, I think. At this point, I would like to, we're slightly ahead of time, but that's fine. That's going to give us some opportunities to field some questions at the end. But for now, I'd like to hand over to Philip, who is the Global Red Team Lead for TrustWave, and he's going to talk about the differences between red teaming and bolting into some of that sort of stuff, as he's part of our focus group. So over to Philip. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. So just like Matt said, working for TrustWave. Sorry, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, just quickly about me, a little introduction. 20 plus years in the cybersecurity, working in the cybersecurity field. As I said, I work for TrustWave. I actually worked for TrustWave in 3 different countries. I've delivered red teams in the UK, the EU, and the US, and I'm currently based in the US. For them, I hold the position of managing consultant. I look after one of the offensive teams. We do all kinds of offensive testing, which includes red teaming, obviously. Like Matt said, global red team lead for delivery for TrustWave. for CREST, I'm a member of the CREST America's Council, and then also a member of the Red Teaming Focus Group with Matt. Old name was the ELT. Next slide, please. Just quickly, the agenda. So I'm going to touch on what does red teaming look like around the world, specifically in terms of the UK and the EU versus the US. Also going to do a little comparison with pen testing and red team and when to use which one. And then lastly, I want to touch on some of the tool chain concerns and like maybe some of the healthy things you have to take into account. Next slide, please. Awesome, thanks. So having led and delivered red teams across multiple continents and regions, I've noticed some interesting differences in how red team testing works. I'm going to share this with you, but I'm going to specifically focus on UK, EU, sort of like versus the US. Just to note, the overview comes from working with large businesses across the regions, but the observations are pretty much limited to TrustWave's engagements and our client base. I'm just adding that in as a note because other organizations might experience it differently. And like Matt said, this market or this field is very much ever changing, and like tomorrow might look completely different to what it is today. So this is just like some of the stuff we see. In the UK and Europe, red team testing follows a very organized and structured approach, a very carefully planned inspection with detailed checklists. We've got the special programs and regulatory frameworks which are followed, like in the financial sector, which we touched on, the C-based, which is driven by the Bank of England, and then the G-based, which is the government departments, which is also based on C-based, but managed by the UK Cabinet Office. So in the UK, during testing, Singapore has the AASE, and then Europe has the Tiber EU, which is very similar or based on sort of like stems from C-based, most of them. In the UK, EU, during testing, security teams would play the role of a skilled attacker, but in a very controlled way. They will try to break into systems while watching if the company's security team can catch them. What makes this interesting is that the regulators keep track of the results. So, which that means, and at the end of the engagement, the company won't just get a report, but they are actually required to fix these weaknesses that were found. The approach in the US is quite different and more flexible in terms of testing. Instead of following a strict rulebook, companies design their security tests based on what makes sense to their specific situation. For example, a bank might focus on protecting customer data and money transfers. A hospital might concentrate on keeping patient records safe. Power companies might be more concerned about their specific controllers regarding their power systems. This freedom lets companies create security tests that match their unique risks and challenges. It's like having a custom-made security plan and sort of like a not a one-size-fits-all approach. And some of the legal boundaries that I want to touch on, which is important. In the UK, there's a very they've got very strict privacy laws. I'm thinking like EU, specifically the GDPR, where you need to, before you ever start testing, you need to get written permission. You have to make sure all test data stays in the same country. You have to have detailed legal agreements that spells out what exactly you can and cannot do. In the UK, in the US, companies have more flexibility on how they run the red team test. This is especially true for the private companies that aren't heavily regulated. While this freedom can be helpful, it can lead to problems. Some of the things teams might not have clearly defined boundaries of what they're testing, or even when they're testing. There might be some some level of approval skipped in terms of not all the company executives or maybe third parties might not give, might not have fully approved whatever is being done. There might be some confusion of some actions that are allowed during the testing and what's not. Moving on to some threat modeling differences. Security experts, sorry, I'm still on that slide, just go back, sorry. So security experts take different approaches to testing system defenses. In Europe and in the UK, red teams like to recreate real-world threats. This is what we alluded to earlier, what we call attack emulation. They study specific hacking groups or APTs, as we refer to them, and copy their methods carefully. This is some, like APT 29, better known as Cozy Bear, who was responsible for the SolarWinds compromise in 2021, or APT 28, which attempted to interfere in the US presidential election in 2016. Now, all their methods, we bundle them into what we call TTPs, like Tony alluded to earlier. This is the tools, tactics, and procedures, which is then captured into the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is a great resource for referencing what TTPs go with which ATPs. Not a lot of acronyms. So playing the role of a known attacker, we'll see if the company can spot and stop like familiar types of attacks. This helps companies prepare for threats they are likely to face. Something to keep in mind, the red teams still run as attack emulations, which means they would act like a specific APT and follow their specific TTPs. But they are not limited to only use these methods. If there's opportunity to follow another attack path, they can do so, which makes it a bit more closer to like what a real life attacker would do. Now, the other one that I've alluded to, the attack simulation, this is where you would mimic ATPs, TTPs, step for step without deviating at all. But this falls a bit more towards like what we call a tabletop, technical tabletop, or a purple team. But I don't want to dive into that for this topic. It's a little bit out of scope for this talk. In the US, red teams take a more adaptable approach. Instead of following a specific actor's playbook, they look at what can cause the most damage for their particular company. Again, for example, teams testing a bank might focus on ways someone could steal money, while a team testing a hospital might focus on compromising patient records. This flexibility helps companies defend against threats that matter most to them. Next slide, please. Next one, yeah. So I just want to touch quickly on the differences between pen test and red team. So companies, both of them are equally important, and I just want to clarify when I say penetration testing, I don't mean vulnerability scan. Some companies try and blend vulnerability scans and penetration tests into one, but I believe they are not the same. For vulnerability scans, you would use like an automated tool, like something like Nessus, which scans the network for systems that are running vulnerable services. This tool will scan a system and define the open ports, grab the banners of the service that's listening on those ports, and compare the captured banners to an internal database of predefined vulnerabilities. A report is generated which contains the detected vulnerabilities and their severity. The biggest problem with vulnerability scans is that there could be a lot of false positives, and also the severity that is given to the vulnerability might not make sense in the context of the environment of the client. So a vulnerability scan is, however, very important and a must-have initial step, which is not to be skipped for any organization who is serious about their security posture. Penetration tests can include vulnerability scanning as a step during the reconnaissance phase. This is when the vulnerabilities are being identified. But where a penetration test vastly differs from a vulnerability scan is there's a lot more manual testing, and the consultant will attempt to exploit the identified vulnerability to determine if the vulnerability is actually valid and if it can be exploited, mostly relying on manual checking. So back to pen testing versus red teaming. Let me explain how each one works. Penetration testing is like giving your house a thorough security check. The security experts look at everything, your websites, company networks, and all the systems that you use to find any places where someone could potentially break in. They check every door, window, and possible entry point, so to speak. This gives you a good overall picture of your security, but because they are checking many things, they can't spend too much time on a single area. So for penetration testing, you get a lot of coverage, but it doesn't go super deep into a specific area. Red team testing takes a different approach. Instead of checking everything at once, red teams act like skilled attackers who have a specific mission. They might try to access sensitive customer data, break into specific important systems, or see if they can move around in your network without being noticed. These professional security experts will try and break into your network in creative ways, not to cause harm, but to show you where your security team needs to improve. This helps companies understand how well they would handle a real attack situation. Just to touch on this table quickly, so penetration test, the goal typically is to find the vulnerabilities. Red team, it's more about detection and response. The scope for pen test can be quite broad. For red teaming, it's very focused and on mission objectives or scenarios, as we refer to them. The duration typically for a pen test is 1 to 3 weeks. For red team, a lot longer, 4 to 12 plus weeks. Penetration tests are typically visible or announced to the blue team. Red teams are secretive in nature, unless specified otherwise. And then, some of the success criteria for pen test might be the number of findings, or the critical high. Is there quite a critical high findings? Whereas a red team is more about stealth, impact, and evasion. Where do you use what? Let's explore when to use what. So penetration testing, you can sort of see as your foundation, as your starting point. Think of it like getting a full medical checkup for your organization security. What pen testing typically can help you with is to find security weaknesses before attackers do. Make sure you're following important security rules and regulations. Verify that your security updates and patches are working correctly, and get a clear picture of your overall security health. Red team testing is like bringing in expert threat actors to test your defenses in real-world scenarios. However, there's an important catch. Your organization needs to be ready for it. There's no point in testing detection if there is no one monitoring your detection systems. And I'm referring to something like a SOC, like a security operations center, or a blue team, in other words. So before starting a red team test, you should have a solid foundation of basic security measures. Something that we refer to as low-hanging fruit needs to be out of the way. A security team actively monitoring your systems. A regular security maintenance and updates need to be in place. Experience in handling and responding to security alerts, which will help a lot. The easy way to remember the difference between the two: penetration testing helps you find and fix security holes, where red team testing shows you how well your security team can catch and stop actual attackers. Next slide, please. I want to touch on some of the tool chain categories that we, as red teaming, need to take into account. This is something like what Matt said about we're working on a guide to try and provide some guidance around the health of your tools and in the tool chain of the red team. So some essential tools that red teams use in security to test security systems is like think of these tools as different pieces of equipment that help us check if a company's defenses are working properly. We organize our tools into 5 main categories, which each have quite a specific purpose, and they can be used in different stages of the red team and in different perspectives. So firstly is the reconnaissance tool or the recon tools. From an external perspective, that could be something like Shodan or Spiderfoot, which helps us understand what systems and networks a company has. It's almost like having a look from the outside, like if you're like surveying a building from the outside. They help us gather public information without actually touching the system. This is something called passive reconnaissance, or by actually scanning the systems, which is referred to as active reconnaissance. Secondly, we have the initial access tools, which typically in red teams, we use something called C2 frameworks, the command and control framework. This is where we have a payload or a program gets executed and it calls back to the C2 infrastructure, which could be something like Cobalt Strike or Mythic, depending on the perspective of the attack. Where you're coming from? Are you coming from the external or are you coming from the internal? Lately, the biggest trend is all about stage 0. This is where you have a very small payload that you can use as a foothold, but it's more like a delivery system for a bigger payload with more functionality. Thirdly, the post-exploitation suite. This could be various different tools, Rubius, PowerView, Seatbelt. They all help us look around inside the systems to understand how they're set up and how the security measures are in which security measures are in place. For stealth and evasion, we use tools like outflank security tooling or MacroPack, which can help us test if we can move around the system without setting off alarms. This helps companies understand if they can detect real intruders. This is where we try and bypass something like EDR or antivirus. And then lastly, which is a very important one, is our documentation and collaboration tools. We use note-taking and reporting tools. Something like PlexTrack comes to mind, where we document everything we find, and then that helps us to create a report that we can give to the companies that will help them improve their security. So understanding these tools and using them responsibly is crucial for any effective red team testing. Each tool has its own purpose, and together they help us thoroughly test and a company's defenses while keeping everything safe and controlled. So popular red team tools, just want to quickly touch on that. So you have like Cobalt Strike, which is a commercial C2 framework. It's probably one of the most well-known red team testing tools. It has many useful features, but it needs to be configured carefully because security systems are very good at detecting it nowadays. Mythic, it's an open source C2. It's a free and flexible tool. It's very adaptable, and testers can, use it for specific needs. Sliver, another open source C2 framework, also a tool that's probably known to work very well on different operating systems, Windows, Mac, Linux. It's got some nice payloads for those. Brutotel, another commercial C2, a very sophisticated tool designed to help testers check if security systems can detect intrusion attempts. Nighthawk, another commercial C2. This is probably very focused. This tool is very focused on bypassing detection. It's designed to work especially well against companies that have strong security systems in place. Then Bloodhound is probably also very well known. It's a tool that creates and maps out how different computer accounts and systems are connected. It helps security teams understand how an attacker might try to move from one system to another, lateral movement, where it can map out attack paths for you on Active Directory. And then some of the other ones, Rubius, PowerView, Seatbelt, sort of like work together to help security testers understand the system once they get inside. You can think of them as different types of scanners that reveal how the system is set up and how the security measures are in place. These tools very important note is these tools must always be obtained from official and trusted sources, and never download them from random websites or unofficial sources. Fake or modified versions often contain dangerous code and can harm your systems and the networks you're testing. So some of the risks of tool chains. Keeping your tools safe and secure is absolutely critical for red teams. Red teams must be very careful about which tools they use and how they store them. This helps protect both the team and the companies they test. For paid tools, it's crucial to only buy from official vendors. Think of it like buying medicine from a licensed pharmacy instead of a stranger. Criminals will often create fake versions of popular tools like CobbleStrike and add dangerous code that can harm your computer. These fake tools can damage the red team's systems and potentially harm the companies they are testing. Every free tool needs special attention. Red teams must download them only from trusted websites and carefully review any updates before installing them. This extra care is necessary because attackers specifically target red team testing tools. They know that compromising a red team's tools could potentially give them access to other companies. Next slide, please. So some of the operational hygiene tips. Again, this is something we're working on the focus group. Keeping your tools safe and secure. So red team tools are like specialized equipment, and this sort of like think in terms of malware. We really need to handle them carefully and store them properly. And here's how we make sure that we can store these tools safely and reliably. So firstly is secure storage. We keep all our tools in a protected digital vault, where every change is tracked and recorded. We attach digital footprints, a digital signature, especially to custom tools, which is similar to a person with their own fingerprints. This proves that the tool came from us and has not been modified. Integrity checking, we use identification codes or hashes to identify codes that can tell our code. This can tell us if someone has changed the tools. Safe testing environments. So before we use any tool in a real test, we try it out in isolated testing areas. And then automated CI/CD pipelines, the continuous integration and continuous delivery. We use security programs to automatically check our tools for problems. We do regular updates, so we keep the tools up to date and apply the latest security fixes. This is all access controlled, and only authorized red team members can modify and access these tools. These careful security measures show our commitment to professional and responsible red team testing. They ensure our tools are trustworthy and safe every time we use them, protecting both our team and organizations we test. So yeah, red team CI/CD. So modern red teams need to work like professional software development teams. They need to keep their tools safe and reliable, just like a software company would manage their code. We need to handle our red team testing tools with the same level of organization and care. Some of the recommendations: do code reviews. We carefully need to check all our code. It's like having a second pair of eyes to look over important work. This can help catch mistakes and problems early. Complete testing. As I said before, we test our tools in different ways and make sure they work exactly as intended. Security checks. We use specific digital signatures to prove our codes are genuine. Separate testing areas. Testing the tools in a special isolated environment first before we run it in live environments. Version control. We track every change to the tool and keep a detailed diary of the modifications. And again, regular updates, constantly improve our tools based on new security information. This careful approach helps ensure our tools are safe, reliable, and ready when we need them. I think it's the last one, last slide. Yes. So just in summary, I want to just run quickly through what we talked about. So different regions handle red team testing differently. UK and Europe have very strict rules. US is a bit more flexible. There are two main types of security testing: penetration testing, which is quick checks of everything; red team testing, longer and focused tests that emulate real attacks. Red teams use 5 main types of tools. That's a recon tool for gathering information, access tools to test security, investigation tool to explore systems, stealth tools to stay hidden, and then documentation tools to track work. Safety is extremely important. We only use tools from trusted sources. We keep tools secure and organized, and test everything before we use it. So the key message is professional red team testing requires careful planning, the right tools, and strong safety measures to be effective. Thank you. I guess.
Thank you, Philip. That was really in depth and really interesting. Thank you for covering off like where you see the differences between pen testing and red teaming, and the general view is that pen testing has had its day and that AI is going to take over and that's no longer a thing. But I'm not entirely convinced that we're there yet. I think that, you know, whilst automation coverage is a really good thing, understanding they're all tools and in part of a broader security profile, right? And so like utilizing all of them at the right places, maybe it's too early for red teaming, or it's not going to give you that type of coverage that you want. In delivery, often as somebody delivering stuff, it can be quite frustrating when you see things. It's like this could have been caught in a different way. So, you know, I think it's about providing good information for people, directing them to where the right tools are based on what their objectives will be, and then understanding when to employ each one, really. So thank you very much for that really comprehensive coverage of the testing. I really appreciate it. So we've had a couple of questions in the chat for people. So thank you very much for getting involved and submitting stuff forwards. One of the questions is regarding CRESTCon. So actually, CRESTCon historically used to be an in-person conference, which was really held in the UK, actually held in London. But CRESTCon is now turning into a much more of a brand. It's going to be a series of events that are essentially both in person and virtual. And the idea is, like, CRESTCon historically has always taken calls for papers from people. There's been multiple tracks around pen testing and incident response and that types of thing, and then and also sort of higher sort of levels of thinking, abstract thinking, sort of CISO level type, GRC type stuff, where it's not all just necessarily about technical capabilities, but it's also about like best practice and management and oversight, etc. So it's always been a really good conference, and historically we've run that in the UK. There's also been spin-off conferences or conferences in different countries, etc., in Australia. But we're really trying to refactor this now. So the idea, as I said, it's going to be an in-person event wherever possible. I'm certainly looking forward to it going on the road. I'll definitely be submitting and trying to see some different places. But also, as I said, like in person and essentially available to all. So there'll be some dates and things being released around the summer, I believe. It's still very much in the early stages of being structured out, but as Boglarka has very helpfully responded to, there's going to be some stuff which is released, and we would really implore people to get involved, submit. It's always a good thing. I definitely encourage people to come forwards and talk and submit to conferences regardless. I've always found it a very useful experience for myself, just if nothing else, to sort of validate a specific area of understanding. So definitely recommend that. So picking up on some of the other questions, we had a question about what qualities does employer look for in candidates. Looking for candidates that can demonstrate a wide range of soft skills, absolutely. And just bringing back to what I said before about professional titles, that's why I myself really think that those are valuable approaches, because like too often we've definitely measured people by the attainment of a particular technical accreditation or certification. You know, see these in jobs. I mean, certainly that was very helpful in my career, looking at what the job industry, what the job market was looking for as to what would be viable qualifications to obtain. But the job is much more than that, whether it's pen testing or red teaming or any facet for security. Understanding how to communicate and involve customers and build that bridge is really important. So it's really good to see that. I'd also say enthusiasm, particularly if you're in the entry level part of your career. There's so much knowledge available to you now, much more so than maybe a couple of decades ago. Almost too much knowledge. I guess a bigger challenge now is, what does good look like? So definitely encourage, you know, building skills, being enthusiastic, learning things. That really is the job, and I think any successful pen testers or red teamers that I know are constantly evolving their skill set, always looking to build in new understanding in different areas. And in that way, I think the job is very much more a vocation than sort of a 9 to 5. It can't fit into a normal working day. And that has to start with your passion for learning and really want to push yourself forward and build some new skill sets. We also had a question related to how the PASTA framework deals with fairly novel and up-to-date attacker TTP. So I can see that Tony has responded to that. But Tony, do you want to pick up that question and respond so that we can add that into the mix?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So overall, just some examples. You know, obviously we just had a limited set of time, but in looking at stage 4 of PASTA, the process for attack simulation threat analysis, the idea is to substantiate your risk, your residual risk, right? It's a risk-centric approach, which basically means let's focus on the things that are most going to affect my target organization, application, product, whatever you're protecting. And let's try to substantiate a threat claim, right? In a threat model, you have threat assertions. The threat assertions, from what I see in the industry, typically security professionals are really quick to basically call an attack a threat. An attack is not a threat. Also, that level of vernacular doesn't message well, but if you're using a real threat, like, for example, extortion, I want to extort you, I want to persist in your environment, I want to compromise your information, right? You can come up with your threat assertions. That level of messaging, by the way, communicates vertically up in your organization and laterally across your engineers, and at different levels. So it's one of the biggest things I see with threat modeling. To stay topical to the question, which is basically, you know, is using TTPs the only way really to kind of leverage and build some level of threat information that so you can do simulations on? And the answer is no. There might be types of attacks that don't have, you know, any of the attributes related to, you know, like TTPs or threat actor, threat motives, and blah blah blah. So, you know, you want to be able to build out your threat model. One of the exercises I like to do with our team when we're working with clients at VerSprite is to be able to, you know, get them in a room, like the people that own the product or are part of the organization, and say, tell us the worst case scenarios for you, right? Tell us for this product, for this app, for this whatever online resource API, what's the worst thing that could happen, right? And so we get their fears. And then, you know, we correlate that to other similar industries that might be in transportation, shipping, logistics, manufacturing, financial, healthcare, right? Because there's pre-existing things that are happening in the environment. And then it's also a creative exercise, right? You're not just relying on what's happened in the past with TTPs and reported incidents and things like that. The question was asked, can this be used as a baseline? Sure, it can be used as a baseline. The reason that approach is good is because it's evidence-based. If someone is basically naysaying, you know, the threat in the threat model, you can say, well, you know what, this is based upon information that we have that's happened over the past 6, 12, 24 months. Net new types of threats that aren't substantiated or aren't really roping in TTPs, and, you know, they're going to require a level of like, well, I want to be able to do this. I want to be able to, you know, take the integrated AI component that's tied to this robotics, humanoid, and it's going to basically unleash havoc in, like, I don't know, a public place. Maybe that sort of, TTP or actual incident hasn't happened, but fathoming that as a possible, concern, especially if you're in robotics manufacturing, is legitimate to put into a threat model. As long as you can basically walk through possible, relationships of the threat to the attacks, to the associated components, built into the robotics example. So hopefully that helps, along with the text I put down on the chat.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, so we've got a couple more. I think Collins has asked a couple of questions, and they're really orientated around entry-level qualifications and what does that mean. We would obviously say that the CPSA certification is a very valuable qualification to have. If nothing else, then it gets you on that CREST pathway, and I think that's one of the advantages that CREST has. It does accommodate for people in the entry stages of their career looking to build that initial understanding, and that's why they're generally, those types of exams cover a broad range of topics at breadth rather than depth. And as you progress through the process of certifications within CREST, you'll find that particular areas become much more specialized. Even in the registered tester section, the certified tester section, you have infrastructure focused certified tester or application focused, and the two exams are very different. Now, that's not to say that you don't have to have some level of understanding of one side and the other. And I think that's why when you look at career paths, in the beginning, it's really about trying to understand lots of different things and how they bolt together. So it can be quite overwhelming because you have to have a fairly decent understanding of Windows and applications, and Linux especially is quite important within testing, both as a platform, but things that you see companies utilize Linux for quite a lot. So building that initial base of knowledge is quite important. And then really it's about where you want to go to and what sort of direction of travel, what interests you most. A friend of mine used to be a developer, and then he became an application tester, and that was a natural transition for him. There used to be bugs and now they're vulnerabilities, that type of thing. Whereas if somebody's particularly interested in mobile development, then that's a good direction of travel. One thing I would say from experience as well, which I don't necessarily think gets spoken about a lot, is you also have to look at the direction of travel for the overall industry. I would say now building cloud-based understanding of how companies operate is an important aspect of a successful career path, basically, because these are the things that you're going to see in sort of real world delivery, and you're going to become exposed to. And so it doesn't hurt to understand these technologies and even look above and beyond maybe vendor specific qualifications just to build that understanding. It can only bring an advantage, particularly when you're tasked with trying to understand or assess a security posture of something. If it's built on a platform that you've already got some level of understanding in, then that can only be advantageous. And as I said, those skill attainments definitely happen regardless of where you are in your career. I mean, I'll throw that out to the rest of the speakers. Would you agree with that as a statement, that this is a constantly evolving requirement for building your own skill sets in both sort of red teaming and general security understanding?
I'll jump in, and I mean, as an OWASP leader for, again, many, many years, I think that if for those that want to get in and kind of steer free away from the very costly, well, there's different routes to get into an industry, especially cybersecurity. They're very costly. I'll just stop there. But I will say that if you want to be able to get into something that really always impresses anybody, whether it be a peer in the engineering realm or the technical realm that is doing adversarial engagements, or from a management standpoint, is being involved with a project, right? So there's a lot of different global projects that are not necessarily always on OWASP. Sometimes there might be related to a GitHub security project, right? It could be a tool. Even if you're non-technical, for those that are listening to this presentation and you're non-technical, get involved with the technical write-ups, right, on that GitHub page. Partake in the meetings. I've seen many that have followed the suggestions, and they've really come up. They've drinking by the fire hose, right? Been in the circles of those that are developing, the next proxy scanner, and they're involved, right? They're involved in the technical documentation. Maybe they're involved in QA testing. Maybe they're involved in just doing, presentations on it, right? Presentations on the actual tool. And there's so many different great projects to get involved on. Selfishly, I'll put out there that the Open Worldwide Application Security Project, OWASP, does have a lot of projects that are in different states. Some of them are in final states, some of them are still in early stages. So you can jump in, and if you want to be able to create a level of branding and just learn on a specific facet of security that you're interested in, then it's definitely an opportunity where you can jump in and be hands-on. I think overall, a lot of employers and peers are going to really appreciate for you to be able to take the plunge and show some level of demonstrative actions of being hands-on. And that could be hands-on offense, where you're doing some level of parameter fuzzing or business logic, business logic hacking. I would I would encourage anyone to be able to focus on areas that are not as trite and overplayed. And I think that will really go a long way in your career, because you could be focusing on a novelty or an area that's still broad enough. Like, let's say, okay, AI red teaming. AI red teaming is actually a thing, and there's a lot of things that you can do to be able to prompt a model to be able to obtain this information, cause it to do hallucinations, greatly, maybe cause it to, cough up, proprietary sensitive information from all the information that's interconnected with the LLM and things like that. But find a specialty, focus on that, and then speak about it, right? Don't just do it behind the scenes, and just share your experiences online, share what you're doing on Twitter, on X, on LinkedIn, update project pages and things like that. And I think that'll be a quicker way into the areas of cybersecurity that you want to be able to focus on.
Thank you, Tony. It's great. People are engaging with this, and we're getting some good good questions coming through there. So I'll pick up a question. Are there any plans to make CREST exams online rather than going to a venue to do the exam? So the main reason for that at the moment is around proctoring, basically. Pearson VUE are an established testing center for this type of stuff. They work with many different vendor types. So for us, it's about that scalability, and it's about that repudiation from the provider. That's a really important aspect of meeting the goals, where we can truly make these exams available to a global audience, because we need to meet the need of that global audience. And so in order to be able to provide facilities where an individual just locks in at their home address, we would have to have some oversight as to what that exam actually means. Generally within the CREST exams themselves, for those that may not have taken them, it's restricted internet access. As Boglarka alluded to earlier, you have the capability of bringing in your own notes and anything that you want to bring to allow sort of knowledge transfer to yourself within the exam. But essentially, you have very limited internet access, and that's by design, because the reality of it is there's just not that much time. Like, there is a lot to do in these exams in a very finite amount of time, and that's part of the design, in the sense that you've got to move quite quickly. There's a lot to do, and so in reality, we build these environments so that they're geared up for, once you land inside them, you have all of the payloads and everything else that you need, and that also evens the playing field, to be honest. Historically, conversations could have been, if you had access to a specific set of tooling, then maybe you would have a better experience than not. Within our current model, that all of those types of things are no longer applicable, because everybody's using the same base builds. Particularly in the RTS exams, you can download those AMI files beforehand to give you a bit of a feeling as to what tools are there, maybe tools you're already familiar with and the types of configuration. So at this point in time, we feel that we've got a really good scalable model that allows us that agility to be able to add in new content to the exam much more frequently than we have historically, whilst also meeting the very strict criteria that we have to abide by in awarding people these types of certifications. So I hope that answers your question. We've also got an AV question here, so I'm going to hand that one back over to Philip.
Yes. So yeah, let me touch on this. There's actually multiple questions. The first one is, what's the current state after odd for AV evasion. Now, it's a constant and uphill battle at the moment, right? Because there's not much things that work out of the box. It's quite difficult to bypass EDR and antivirus these days. So you have to, like I said, with the CI/CD pipeline, your malware development absolutely has to run as a pipeline, just because you can't keep up with bypassing basically. That's how the bad guys, that's how the threat actors do that, is they actually run it as a pipeline. So exactly like a software security company would do with their code, that's how they run them. The second question is, how do you deal with red team engagements where you don't achieve much? I think there's always an opportunity to show value. What we do, especially at my company, is if we run into a security control that stops you, that you can't progress any further, we would like artificially bypass that control and carry on. Sometimes that means that the cat's out of the bag, right? So the evasion is no more possible, which makes it shift a bit more towards the purple team side, and the red team steps out of the shadows, and it becomes a bit more of a transparent conversation with the SOC or the blue team. That's how we handle it. We try and give as much value as we can. And then the last question was, do you build a client time for preparing payloads, toolkits, refining payloads? I think that's a yes and a no question. So if we've got a new method or new way of bypassing, for example, you're not going to build a client. That's going to be on your own development. But when you build infrastructure for a red team, it's new for every client. That's at least how we do it. So we break down all the infrastructure, say the C2 framework, break it down completely, build it from scratch, which also involves like the method of payload deploying the payload, the actual payload, that's all built. So sort of like yes and no, sort of a mix there. I think that's my 2 cents.
I was just going to add on to that, especially on the question related to what happens if you do a red team and you basically don't have much, right, to show for it. This is a great question, by the way, and many times, like, we've come in and there's been a pretty confident system that says, hey, we did this for the past 5 years, and here's a clean bill of health, and they kind of show us the prior reports from other outfits, and I am blown away that sometimes there's like nothing there. Like there might be like a detailed findings section, for a particular type of exploit, and there's nothing there. This is kind of a pet peeve of mine because one of the things that we've always done since the inception of VerSprite is to be able to show. Part of the red team is really to show, yes, where you're vulnerable, but also where you're capable. And that's lost in these types of adversarial engagements, right? You have a company that is investing a lot of money and a lot of time, right, to see, okay, let's go ahead and take us to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu floor mat and see what sort of things you can pin us down, but also see where we have good defenses where you can't pin us down. So if you're out there as a practitioner, it's really important that you understand that, right? For us, we, going back to the presentation, like, it's non-negotiable to do a threat model based red team. We build the model of threats against what we're red teaming, and we say we're going to do these 5 threat scenarios because your peers in your industry have been affected by this for the past 6, 12, 18 months. And in going through the attack patterns that support the threat assertions in the threat model, we might be unsuccessful in, let's say, 20% of the attack patterns. And in those cases, what you want to do is to see, what did you notice, right? What did you notice as you were going through maybe part of your, just understanding the attack surface, trying to do recon on the attack surface came up short? Well, share that with the client. Show exactly what you did. Show your stepping blocks, it goes beyond the generic methodology section that's in a report. It actually shows step by step, like this is what we did, this is what we tried, and we tried these different things and we failed. And so what the buyer can do is they can take that and they can go into their internal or external SOC and say, hey, did you notice this, right? But it gives a sense, this is at an executive level, CTO, CFO, CIO, those types of individuals are really genuinely concerned about what did we do right, what did we do wrong? Because oftentimes they're writing checks and they're, bringing these types of security issues to the board. So they want to know where they stand. It's really important that if you do fail in some of the areas and doing an adversarial test, that you kind of show what you tried, where you noticed some failure, where you've actually noticed maybe where you got blocked or caught, what types of evasion techniques you tried, and how that didn't pan out for the time that you had, and what sort of things that you would try the next time maybe, right? And this is all great analysis that really differentiates, one class of an adversarial engagement from an entity versus another, right? There's the whole market of like adversarial simulations is very, very broad. Some of them are just tool-based, press a button, have a cup of coffee, and get the results and put it into a frame of a report. Others are, definitely reads like a Tom Clancy novel, right? So you want to be able to understand what you're buying if you're on the buying side, and it's very important to kind of show what's been mitigated or been like as a block when you're doing any sort of adversarial exercise.
Thank you, Tony. So we've got a couple more questions. We're getting close to time now, but it's great that we've got this interaction. So one part of it, so any plans for CREST CCRTS Hack the Box skill path and updated path for CCC Inf Web? There aren't any specific plans for that at the moment in terms of pushing anything new, but that's not to say that they aren't in the pipeline. I'm just not aware of them at the moment. But they are. We certainly do have partnerships with Hack the Box, etc. And these are all valuable ways that we can highlight the types of things that we expect people to be able to know when they're coming to take these exams. So I think probably the fair answer is I don't know of anything immediately, but I am pretty confident that they will be in the pipeline, especially as we continue to update the exams and evolve things out. So I think probably the best advice there is to keep an eye on the CREST website and the public social media channels that we have for any updates around that sort of stuff. And then picking up on the second question, so I've seen a lot of pen tests. This is from an anonymous person, so apologies. I've seen a lot of pen test red team engagements focused on EDI bypass, e.g. DLL hooking, etc. How prevalent is this technique across more sophisticated threat actors without undermining more complex cyber attacks? Most that make the news resume to pretty much basic social engineering techniques. I think that's a fair point, and you do see a range of that, particularly if you start seeing some of the breaches as practitioners of the discipline. You learn how these attack chains have gone, and you realise that actually, maybe somebody within a very short matter of time managed to get significant privileges in the environment and deploy stuff. So I think it largely depends. I think the very, very sophisticated threat actors that are really serious concern, you probably don't hear about those breaches as much, quite frankly, because how they operate. So I think it's a mixed bag. I think it comes back to some of the points that were raised before in the questions around emulation versus simulation. You really have to know what you're trying to emulate, the type of capability of a threat actor, and whether it's sort of a threat actor group with access to commodity malware that's very quick to be able to gain access to. The reality of it is we still see these breaches as being successful, and I'm of the view that it's still the same impact. In some senses, if it's a little bit more worrying, I would imagine, in some senses for an organization, if they've invested a lot of money into security tooling and it's still possible for a threat actor to breach an environment and then gain significant control over that environment pretty quickly before the organization has an opportunity to respond. And even in mature environments, I've seen, we've had opportunities where they've been in transitioning from maybe one third-party SOC provider to another, and just the transition itself, whilst a new provider is learning the environment, presents opportunities. So I think it's a real cat and mouse game, and maturity is a word that is thrown around quite a lot. And my personal view is that maturity is not necessarily about what type of budget that you've got and what you've invested in terms of security tooling, but it's really in how effective you can detect and respond and mitigate some of those threats. And ultimately, I think it does come down to the basics, like network segregation, hardening of endpoints, understanding where privileges are in the environment, good share hygiene, etc. These all kind of fit in. Sadly, for practitioners, I'm sure we still see those types of things that would have probably benefited from some precursive pen testing beforehand, or again, it's just understanding about the why and knowing what it is that we're trying to achieve, this sort of stuff. But I do agree that at times it's a case of, really, that actually worked, but if it works, a threat actor successful, then that is where the risk is. It's a tricky one. So I think actually we've come to the end of that now. So we've only just got a couple of minutes left. So I think on that basis, I just want to put out a huge thanks to all our speakers for getting involved and putting forward their time today. Really good to have a regional focus and bring in people within that region and share their experiences of that. Really thanks to everybody that's attended as well. Really great to see the engagement within the questions. We've covered a lot of stuff, and we've had the opportunity to really cover a couple of those topics. Hopefully you feel like you've had a bit of an insight into what we're working on in CREST and what we're pushing forwards. So it's really exciting to see the progression there. And please keep an eye out for any additional webinars that will be released. As I said, we're planning to make these community events really regular, covering a range of topics. So we'd be very interested in understanding what types of things are of interest to you and how we can potentially pull in bits and pieces that would cater for that. This webinar itself will actually be has been recorded and will be shared with those that have attended, and then we'll look to make some of this public as we move forward. But I'll pass around to the rest of the speakers. But from me, thank you very much for spending this time with us, and I hope that you've found some value and you've enjoyed the event. Okay, I think on that basis then, thank you very much, and all the best. Thank you.